Imagine yourself walking down the concrete halls of a science lab deep below the ground, rifle in hand, sirens blaring as red lights illuminate the hall ahead. As your colleagues run past for the door at the end, a terrible, guttural bellow echoes from the vents above. Turning your rifle up to them, before you can even react, one explodes open as a meaty, muscular, fibrous tentacle shoots out. As swiftly as it appeared, it grabs a fleeing co-worker and flings him into you, sending you flying back, disorientating you as you lay sprawled out against a cold, hard floor. Just about getting your senses, you sit up rifle in hand, ready, just to see your co-worker's body be dragged upwards and violently tugged through the open vent by the fleshy limb in a singular motion, out of sight. No more than a second later, you hear his harrowing, blood-curdling screams, followed by the crunching of bone and rending of flesh, fresh blood almost immediately beginning to drip down from the ducts above. Forcing yourself to stand, aiming up at the vent, fear beginning to set in, you step forward, ready to light up whatever lay in the dim vents above. Just as quickly, another limb pounces from the duct, ensnaring you and violently tugging you upwards, the gun escaping your grip. Pulled into the vent, you stare ahead, only to be met with a wall of crimson flesh, eyes and jagged teeth staring back at you, dimly illuminated but clearly defined. Between it and you, covering the floor of the vent below, is chunks of what was once the co-worker, an ID tank visible among the scattered gore. Just barely comprehending the thing ahead of you, it opens its maw and pulls you inwards. Before you can even react, it clamps down on your abdomen, each gnarled fang puncturing straight through you, followed by the searing pain. Feeling it course through you, fear mixing with agony, you scream in terror as the beast begins to thrash violently, slamming your head into the side walls of the vent repeatedly. Each blow tremendous, sending shockwaves of pain through your body, followed by another set of stabbing pains in your abdomen as the sensation of your legs ceases, finally followed by blackness and numbness as silence takes you. That, my dear viewer, is an example of how the subject of today's video would go about things, that being the creature from Carrion. The story I told you being the perspective of its prey, which surprisingly you don't play as. Instead, in Carrion you play as the monster itself, a red amorphous tentacled creature of unknown origin, albeit we do get an idea of this through the flashback scenes throughout the game's story. The creature being found originally within an egg-like sac by 3 scientists, and upon awakening killed 2 of them and possessed the 3rd. However, the company that were going to study the creature, Relif, their security forces arrived and executed the remaining scientist who was controlled by the creature, which forced it out into the open and allowed them to capture it and contain it. Which brings us to the start of the game, where the creature escapes its containment and goes on a rampage throughout the facility. During its rampage, the creature would break open vessels containing genetic information, giving it offense, defense, and utility abilities. All of these combined making it a more efficient predator. And eventually, the beast returns to its initial containment area and absorbs the last stolen piece of its genetic code, allowing it to reconstruct a human form which takes the appearance of the scientist it originally infected. It escapes the facility and heads towards a partially quarantined city as the sun sets, that being the plot of the main game. And when it comes to the plot, we're going to be disregarding the Christmas DLC, as there is nothing really to do with the plot there and it would conflict with the plot anyway. But the game's official comic gives us more information. When this is exactly set, I am unsure, but it's probably after the ending of the main game. Anyway, firstly, the creature learns from what it eats and has all the desires of what it absorbs, clarified by the creature itself in the comics while it's possessing a host. Secondly, its next to be victim questions if the monster would want to kill itself if it absorbed enough life that's hostile to itself, like the man who it's talking to who ends up trying to pull out a gun on it. The creature straight up doesn't answer, so it's unknown if this would be the case, but I personally think with the way it stared at him and the fact that it doesn't eat the enemy soldiers and just leaves their corpses behind in the main game, the answer is probably a yes. It intentionally doesn't want to eat those who want to kill it, because it wants to preserve its will to live. Thirdly, the comics mention the Tubifex worms that are mentioned in flashbacks, implying a connection between the two. Not only that, but it outright states that the worms are the thing that made it dangerous, as that gave it the desire to eat, apparently. If this is true, then it means that the creature has existed in another form prior to consuming the Tubifex worms. Fourthly, now that I actually think about it, this is very likely set after the main game, as when the guy tries to pull his gun on the creature, the thing kills him and then escapes into the sewers, out into the water, and then into the city, coming out of a manhole in the final panel of the comic. And with that, we have covered the timeline. Now to talk about the actual personality of this creature and how it works, or what little personality we actually see. It's exceedingly straightforward. It's simply just a predatory life form that seeks to consume as much biomass as possible to keep spreading and growing and creating more nests as it spreads, absorbing the abilities and genetics and will of whatever it consumes. It's that straightforward and simple. Albeit between the game and the comic there's a notable difference. In the comic, while the creature is being interviewed, when its disguise is blown, it doesn't immediately rip the guy to pieces. It's only when he pulls its gun out on it that it even attacks him. which to me at least implies that this thing has developed some sense of humanity. Albeit not much humanity, as after it kills them, it exits into the city, probably to continue killing and eating humans. Interestingly, according to Behind the Screams, the monster claims to be an artist and loves art, but this is very likely non-canon. And that's pretty much all there is to say about its personality. Now to talk about its abilities. Quite a few of them you get through standard gameplay, but there's a few that you have to unlock by exploring and cracking open the correct containers. And a few come by default, the ones you get by default being the echolocation and the tentacle for grabbing prey. Also its ability to pick things up with tentacles, the ability that gives it multiple tentacles, and parasitism. All three of these abilities are independent of the growth state of the creature and can be used at any stage. This also includes the raw echolocation ability. But when it comes to stage dependent abilities, for context, if the creature consumes biomass it will grow larger and you can deposit it in special pools, allowing you to shrink down. But anyway, with the stage 1 abilities, actually before we get into this, I'm just going to say I cannot say the medical names for these abilities, so I'm just going to call them what they are functionally. Anyway, the stage 1 creature has access to the ability to shoot cobwebs to trap its victims or interact with objects, and the ability to bend light to create an invisibility cloak, allowing it to turn essentially invisible. This ability in particular needing you to recharge from the electrical boxes. Moving on to the stage 2 abilities, we have one where the monster creates scythe-like blades from its body and charges forward with a roar, which is used primarily to smash through wooden walls in the early game and to slash through enemies with massive damage, and can also be used to push out the giant plugs that are blocking the player's path. There's an ability that allows you to grow a bunch of deadly keratin spikes, can be used against various enemies for attack and defense. This can primarily be used against enemies such as drones, as they will deliberately attempt to make contact with you. But this ability consumes energy depending on how many spikes are produced by the creature. And next we have the stage 3 abilities. One of them lets you fire a destructive vortex of harpoons and pulls objects upon retracting. This is used to dislodge the giant plugs late game, but can also be used for combat, and has the capability to smash through destroyable things in the environment, and is capable of dealing colossal damage to any enemy that gets in front of the attack. And now we have the final stage 3 ability, which allows you to grow a thick and strong layer of keratin, but this requires energy to be used. You can't use your prehensile tentacle while using this, albeit it gives protection from attacks, specifically protecting you from fire and bullet damage without losing biomass. Instead you burn away energy of each blocked damage. And it's also good for getting past explosive traps, as these will otherwise kill you instantly. And with that, now to talk about the creature's passive abilities. Hydrophilia, which allows you to turn to a swarm of worms and pass through tight spots when underwater. Electrosis, which increases your maximum energy level. And lastly, Pyrophilia, which gives you resistance to fire damage. Notably, Electrolysis and Pyrophilia can both be upgraded. The upgrade to energy can be found 4 times, and the upgrade to Pyrophilia can be found twice. And with that, now we can go over trivia about the creature and general information. The amount of worms in the Hydrophilia underwater form is equal to the amount of biomass you have. The monster does not have an official name, but most refer to it as the thing, the creature, or it. Its eye color changes with its evolutionary stage, the first being green, the second being yellow, and the third being red. And the game is often compared to several other things. John Carpenter's movie The Thing, given its ability to change body shape at will, as well as mimicking infected hosts by killing and absorbing them. It is sometimes compared to the Xenomorph from the Alien franchise, especially when you consider its predatory cunning, resilience to attack, its fear of fire, and tendency to travel via ventilation. The creature's overall shape and abilities are comparable to the Shoggoths from H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, a race of giant shape-shifting alien blobs with multiple eyes, tentacles, and mouths. And lastly, the creature is very durable, as it harvests electricity to gain energy directly from high voltage power systems, which for normal organic life would fry it and kill it immediately. And with that, lastly, I want to talk about my personal theory on where I think the creature comes from. Starting with how they found the creature in an unknown structure referred to as the Derelict, which appears to have been a research location of some kind, which has similar drones to the Relic Science Facility. If it consuming Tubifex worms is what made it so aggressive, that very likely happened in the Derelict, as the creature in its egg sac form looks just like the deposited biomass the player can put in special ponds, so the form we see it in at the beginning of the game is very likely the form it took when it was originally there. This, plus the consideration of the calcified remains that can be found, along with the skeletons, means that whatever incident happened at the Derelict happened a good while ago. I personally theorize that the Derelict was a previous lab that they owned, but the creature escaped and destroyed it. But as to its exact origin, I personally think Relic created the creature, as they were very easily able to take away pieces of its genetics. So I personally think that the creature was engineered by them as an experiment, but it breached containment and are now studying the aftermath of it. Specifically, they're trying to figure out how it absorbed the genetics and utilize them in itself. And that's pretty much it. And with that, that is my video on the creature from Carrion. This was a pretty short one, but I do hope you enjoyed it. Have a great October, happy Halloween, see you around.